Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unauthorized Disclosure Podcast. I'm Kevin Gosztola, co-host, and I'm joined by Rania Khalek, another co-host. Hey, Rania.
Hey, Kevin, good to be back on.
And we have a really good guest and someone we actually haven't had on the show before, which is kind of unusual because he's in a network of people in which you would have thought we would have had him on our show already. So I guess we apologize. But Kit Klarenberg is joining us, and he will be discussing his reporting that he's been doing at the Grayzone, and as well as you've been diligently keeping on top of this on your Twitter account, following developments related to it. And this involves emails involving Paul Mason and other figures who targeted and have been targeting anti-war academics, journalists who tried to expose the workings of the UK and US intelligence agencies. We're going to get to all of it, but welcome, Kit.
Hey, how's it going?
And so, let's begin. I don't want to presume that anyone tuning in fully knows what I just said, like has any idea what I just told people, because this is something that I think it'd be easier to follow if you were in our profession, because these people hate us. They actively don't want us to be able to work. And they're people who don't want Rania to be employed, don't want you to be employed, don't want people at the Grayzone to have work in journalism. So why don't you, before we get too far into any of your specific stories, why don't you just give people a sort of overview of what you've been doing over the last couple months? You've been working with these leaked emails, and just, generally speaking, what has this shown as far as I know that it's connected to the effort to counter quote unquote disinformation.
Sure. I mean, for the past few months, we've been reporting at the Grayzone on a vast tranche of leaked emails. Initially, this related to the covert activities of this right-wing cabal of former intelligence and military officials, the most prominent of which is an individual called Gwydion Prinz, who is a long-time NATO advisor, and the other is Richard Dearlove, who was the head of MI6 between 1999 and 2004 and played a very prominent role in perpetuating false intelligence about Iraq's non-existent weapons of mass destruction, which proved pivotal in the launching of that illegal war of aggression. And latterly, we've been focusing on the covert activities of Paul Mason, who your viewers may not know, but is a kind of veteran British journalist, worked for the BBC for many years and then Channel 4, and subsequently, latterly, he's sort of reinvented himself as a kind of radical. I mean, he's a former Trotskyist. As was Christopher Hitchens, who seems to have followed much the same path. Like a kind of radical leftist. He was a tub thumping supporter of Syriza in Greece, and then Jeremy Corbyn. But recently, he's again reinvented himself as a kind of rabid pro-intervention, pro-NATO war hawk. Since the conflict in Ukraine started, he's been viciously attacking Jeremy Corbyn, the Stop the War movement in the UK, and anti-imperialist and anti-war journalists such as myself, and Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate. And so, as such, when we began reporting on these emails, people were shocked but not particularly surprised that these activities seem to have been coordinated with, if not directed by, elements of British intelligence, in particular an individual named Andy Price. And so, I mean, it's a very, very fascinating insight, and into how power actually works and what goes on behind the scenes that people are typically prohibited from ever seeing or knowing anything about.
It's incredible because Paul Mason is also somebody who writes, well, he's been really bad on imperialist issues for a long time. In terms of what he's written, right? He's like, oh, we should support these, crazy jihadist rebels in Syria to overthrow the evil Assad regime. I believe he supported a fly zone in Libya, kind of polices any leftists who are against that. And of course, on Ukraine, like he actually went to Ukraine, I believe, and like led a pro-NATO delegation. He read like a pro-NATO protest in London a few months back. So he's like this sort of pro-imperialist social chauvinist left, claimed to support Jeremy Corbyn, but is also like explicitly trying to undermine the Stop the War coalition. But what's incredible is on top of like kind of propagandizing for imperialism from a position of the supposed left, the fact that he's trying to actively coordinate with UK intelligence figures. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that and what exactly he was trying to do here? Because it was, I mean, he was literally trying to get the state to shut down speech from anti-war journalists. So can you kind of get into the details of that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, he is utterly convinced that lurking behind every kind of anti-imperial independent media outlet is the Chinese or Russian state. And so, yeah, I mean, one of the activities he discussed with Andy Price was the creation of an international information brigade, which in public would be an independent civil society organization countering disinformation, but in reality would effectively be an intelligence agency clearinghouse. And repeatedly in leaked emails, he asks Andy Price to look into consortium news, into Mint Press, and there's a very he conspired with this other individual named Amol Khan, who's a kind of long time British intelligence adjacent information warrior who is very active in the Syrian conflict, providing communication support to armed groups that were also obviously in receipt of extensive Western funding, training, and weaponry. And yeah, the strategy seems to be to malign, ostracize, and quite relentlessly deplatform independent anti-war voices under the aegis of countering foreign-born disinformation. I mean, it's really quite disturbing the lengths he was willing to go to, and yes, in his conspiring with Amol Khan, what they attempted to do, what they were seeking to do, with no success, because it was based on just a complete fantasy that Grayzone is actually a Russian intelligence operation, was that they were seeking to engage organs of the British state, including the intelligence services, to publicly expose Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate as being effective Kremlin agents, and yes, to financially cripple the organization and get it banned from other social media platforms and stuff. And it's just interesting that his kind of 0 to 100 go-to for dealing with adversaries is just to ruin them via various underhand, undemocratic means. There's one email where he was particularly angry about an article written by Alan McLeod, who's a fantastic journalist writing for Mint Press. Alan exposed how Kiev Independent, which is, as the name implies, ostensibly an independent journalist collective, is funded by a welter of kind of Western intelligence cutouts, including the National Endowment for Democracy, which is, avowedly a front for a CIA front. So he emails Price in respect to this article, saying, how do we fight back? The obvious implication being, well, we need to engage the spying agencies to ruin these people and get them kicked off Twitter. And it's like, why is your response not, I'm going to try and rebut them or debate them? Like, why is your reflexive response to engage in all of these egregious and very kind of ethically and professionally dubious activities, just to shut down viewpoints and that you don't like? I mean, Price seems to be very amenable to this, and yes, they discussed the creation of something called the International Information Brigade, as I said, and they stated very openly that, well, this needs to look organic because our enemies can spot an information operation. So yes, the more this looks like a kind of genuine grassroots effort, the better. And it's like, this is what you're accusing other organizations of being. Like, this is just you are proposing and eagerly advocating to do precisely what what you accuse the Grayzone of falsely.
Yeah, and it's stunning because some of it seems to be. I'm recalling one of the exchanges that I think probably resonated with a lot of people who read this reporting. where I believe there's a suggestion that they should do something in the style of John Oliver's Last Week Tonight, in order to have this sort of, I suppose, moment in which you could own these groups or an individual that you are going after, as if like that high profile dunking would succeed in completely shutting down the ability of an organization to do their work. And it just doesn't really work like that. That's not going to be the like end all be all for Grayzone journalism or for any other anti-war or anti-imperialist outlets journalism. And that said, there's a couple examples here that we can put on the screen from your work. Let's start with the Paul Mason flow chart that is. I'm going to fill the entire screen with this just because it is a masterpiece.
Very big.
And so it's going to be really difficult for anyone following to maybe see and make out all of this. But generally speaking, why don't you just tell people what's on the right side? Because those are basically like the useful idiots, right? Aren't they like the ones that it seems like Paul wants everyone to believe that they're being manipulated by these forces that the Western world are trying to confront, right?
Yeah, I mean, so essentially, yeah, this is yes. I think he calls it a network influence map, and it's supposed to chart the path of Chinese and Russian disinformation throughout the British left. He's been asked by one of the groups named, which your viewers might not be able to see, is the Young Socialists. Its leader, Jess Banyard, who's a fantastic campaigner. She asked him point blank about whether he created this map, and he said that he didn't recognize it, quote unquote, which is an outright lie. I mean, some other eagle-eyed Twitter users have dug up previous bizarre charts that he's created, which look exactly identical, use the same font, etc. And it seems that this was produced specifically for his intelligence contact Andy Price. He very excitedly emailed it over to him and said, "I'll go over it with you in a quiet place sometime if you want." And essentially it just. He claims that he's denied that he had that this was in any way part of a kind of suppression or blacklisting operation. But what's quite striking is there are some leaked emails which we will be reporting on in future, where effectively that he's in, and some of which we have already reported on, where he's essentially trying to engage academics to create a tool to track down kind of elements of the academic community who cast doubt on official narratives related to specific incidents in the Ukraine conflict. Say, for instance, the Bucha massacre. I mean, the official narrative doesn't make much sense. Several people have, such as Justin Schlossberg, who is an academic dealing in specializing in disinformation for Birkbeck University in London, who have stressed the need to be skeptical and cautious about accepting official claims on faith. And this simply won't do from his perspective. And very suspiciously and conveniently, not long after he conducts these kind of secret conversations with these academics, the BBC put together what was effectively a state hatchet job on Justin Schlossberg and indeed Tim Hayward, who is a member of the working group on propaganda and is also an academic at the University of Edinburgh, who's likewise raised questions about the narrative of the Bucha massacre. And so there doesn't seem to appear to have been any real news value in creating this, and it was an incredibly biased, misleading hatchet job. It was so misleading that Justin Schlossberg investigated taking legal action because it fundamentally and repeatedly misrepresented his position, omitted crucial facts, etc. And Paul Mason features very prominently in that program, saying that these academics and others like them are they are, whether they know it or not, like Putin puppets. And so it's the obvious question to ask is whether this program directly arose from his contact from his secret academic contact. And yes, he boasts about the fact that this program is being made in emails with Andy Price. He specifically refers to its host Chloe Hadjimatheo, who has previously made 2 very dubious quote unquote documentaries. One about Rackers being slaughtered silently, which was created by British intelligence, and also a 13-part series on May Day Rescue, which was another British intelligence construct, which is founded by James the Measurer, a kind of long time, army intelligence operative and mercenary, and which was just this kind of a whitewash, but B, a kind of total hatchet job. So quite clearly, she's a go-to person, and she's the Price is familiar with her. So I mean, and it's true. It's truly disturbing that again, the BBC, which has this unimpeachable reputation and an enormous audience, is being engaged for deep state propaganda purposes.
So this is such an incredible story. I'm curious also about other outlets he went after. I saw some of did he go after people in Novara Media? Like, it wasn't even just the far sort of left-wing anti-imperialist outlets, because Novara Media is a little bit squishy on that sort of stuff. But they were also quite offended because he went after them as well. It's like, no one's okay unless you are completely pro-NATO. You are not good enough for Paul Mason. You are somehow Putin's mouthpiece.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really quite extraordinary, and one of his kind of covert collaborators is this academic called Emma Bryant, who is a kind of self-styled disinformation expert. But she wanted to go even further than Mason did, so he shared his map with her, and she said, "Oh, I don't see declassified UK on here. I mean, is that because they're different?" Plays, and he responds saying, "I'm not sure that they're pernicious," and then she shoots straight back saying, "Oh, no, they are, because they're critical of Carol Cadwalladr and Russiagate, and they discourage people from reading The Guardian." And it's like, the Classified UK have published numerous articles which are extremely critical of the governments of Russia and Syria. They have published editorials, harshly condemning, the war in Ukraine. None of its contributors or the outlet in general could plausibly be accused of being even an unwitting conduit for Russian propaganda. But no, criticize Carol Cadwalladr, and then that's beyond the pale, and that you are disinformation peddlers, and something needs to be done about you. And this is another thing as well, is Emma Bryant has claimed it's completely ridiculous to suggest that I was, involved in some kind of blacklisting operation. But what did she think was going to happen? And it's very, very, very clear that that Mason, when he was providing information to Price, expected it to be acted upon in some way, for there to be consequences, for the individuals and organizations involved. I mean, it's quite clear as well that these people inhabit a wilderness of mirrors, and they find everything suspicious. So there's this really quite extraordinary exchange where Scary Poppins Nina Jankovic crops up in it, interestingly, where essentially the consortium published an article. Consortium News published an article raising questions about the official narrative on Bucha, and then Mason immediately emails Price saying, "Who funds Consortium News?" And then Price responds saying, "Well, I've spoken to Nina Jankovic about this, and she's convinced that they're just useful idiots rather than being in receipt of covert Russian funding and direction." But he himself was not quite so sure, and he referred to a gap in Consortium's output between 2005 and 2011 as somehow very suspicious and notable. In reality, there was no gap in its output. What happened was that its founder, the late great Robert Parry, it was this investigative legend. He in 2011 switched to WordPress, so had to re-upload a lot of the old content from the site. So and it's quite clearly there was no gap apart from in Price's own mind. But this means that they're suspect and should be probed by the intelligence services. And subsequent to this, Consortium got booted off PayPal without any kind of explanation or warning or recourse, and the same happened to Mint Press, which Mason also mentioned, as I said, in emails to Price. So it's just did this play any role? in PayPal's egregious decision to cut off a key financial lifeline for them. I mean, it's something worthy of investigation.
Yeah, I think that's something I want to broaden out a little bit, and if you could share what you know or what you've been able to glean from the entirety of this cache of emails. Well, some of this relates to the Counter Disinformation Unit in the UK. So I suppose whatever they're doing is probably what Nina Jankowicz imagined she'd be able to do. But it is worth acknowledging that the Homeland Security Department in the US, as it fits into the security state, it's, it's kind of a poorly behaved stepchild, sort of, in the sense that, like, it's not really positioned in a manner to do what, like, the FBI or the CIA or the NSA. It's not very well established. It's such a new agency, and I think it really does have to, and it still probably hasn't found its space in the national security state bureaucracy. Whereas, I don't know, maybe it's easier for this Counter Disinformation Unit in the UK to act and work with, because it's we're talking about a smaller country in comparison to the United States, and also the UK doesn't technically have to manage a vast empire. The UK just benefits from being cozy with the leadership of a vast empire. But that being said, this Counter Disinformation Unit that features in your reporting, a lot of it seems like this action, the activities are accelerating and escalating as Russia invades in Ukraine and as the Western world is responding to or advancing their agenda against Russia's involvement in their offensive in Ukraine. And so can you speak to how this forms the backdrop and what has a little bit about what has transformed in the UK in particular, and what it means for journalists? I know that Priti Patel herself is trying to force through or win support, and I don't think it's been hard. So I don't know why I used the word force, but she has bipartisan support for a combating state threats bill, which in a sense would codify a lot of what we're talking about here, because not if we can broaden it out here, we're not just talking about journalists anymore. If we talk about people who are even registered lobbyists or not registered lobbyists, the idea that they would be involved in organizational or activities on behalf of business that represent the interests of countries in, let's say, China or any other countries that might be challenged by the UK or the US, the idea that they would be trying to lobby and campaign for changes in UK policy, if they're effective and the UK doesn't like them, they're developing this law so that they can essentially criminalize people, whistleblowers, lobbyists, journalists, anyone who you could connect to the effort to change political policy, that then they could be essentially prosecuted by the UK government. And you see this, and you see, I know it's mentioned in there about how the Disinformation Unit played a role in advising that there'd be just like a wholesale ban on Russia media from platforms. So can you get into the place of this Disinformation Unit in the last year?
Yes, probably since 2016, if not earlier, there have been enormous efforts across the Western world, the US, the UK leading the charge to effectively censor alternative viewpoints and independent media online. These efforts have become turbocharged and legitimized, and yes, now have bipartisan support and overwhelming public backing for direct government censorship of social media. It's really quite disturbing. But the Counter Disinformation Unit was set up in March 2020 to tackle alleged disinformation related to the pandemic, and it has operated in virtually total secrecy ever since. There have been something like 69 separate questions have been asked about it in Parliament, and ministers have stonewalled. So we know very little about its staff, its budget, its operations, exactly what kind of disinformation it's tackling, and yes, freedom of information requests have also been just reflexively declined on the grounds of national security. It's now working in close conjunction with the Government Information Cell, which was created just days before Russia invaded Ukraine, and they are in direct contact. The cell and the unit are in direct contact with major social media platforms. In one email, Price boasts about being behind YouTube's ban on Russian media in the UK, and yes, there are indications they're also they are coordinating with TikTok and Twitter, and also Facebook's parent company Meta. Again, a very illuminating passage in one email. Mason gets in touch with Price to say that quite a few independent outlets are moving away from Twitter and onto Telegram and WhatsApp, kind of closed group chats. And then Price says, well, there's actually something we can do about WhatsApp, which does tend to suggest that they are given a backdoor, or at least have some kind of privileged position to police who uses it and how, which is terrifying Orwellian. I mean, that there is you mentioned the Disinformation Governance Board. One of the reasons that Price would have been familiar with Nina Jankowicz, beyond the kind of counter disinfo industry being so incestuous, and kind of it's a small set of people all patting each other on the back and reinforcing each other's kind of very slanted, dubious viewpoints, was that she sat on the advisory board of something called Open Information Partnership, which remains to this day a Foreign Office information warfare project. This was launched by the Counter Disinformation and Media Development Unit of the Foreign Office, which seems to be a forerunner of the CDU, and which Price ran for much of its existence. I mean, again, its existence wasn't even acknowledged until late 2018, which is years after it launched. So I mean, Price knows what it was doing in the meantime. But yeah, essentially, on paper, Open Information Partnership is an anti-disinfo operation, a collective of NGOs and fact checkers and independent media outlets in the former Soviet sphere in Central and Eastern Europe, which is tasked with identifying and countering Russian disinformation. In kind of classified internal files, which I possess, the reality is spelled out as being rather different. So there's a very illuminating passage in one document which states that one of the key barriers to countering Russian disinformation is that it's often factually true, which is quite an extraordinary admission. And then there are assessments of the various organizations involved in this. Bellingcat was a founding member of Open Information Partnership, and but it was judged to be discredited by spreading disinformation and producing reports for anyone willing to pay. A Estonian fact checker called ProperStop, which is part of OIP, it was judged to have frequently published false stories, have links with neo-fascist groups in Estonia, and attempted to incite violence against Estonia's Russian minority. So, not a kind of the kind of organization you would be wanting to be associated with if you were serious about countering fake news and propaganda. And so, her role overseeing this got very little press. I think I'm the only journalist in the entire world who's drawn attention to it and covered it. I wrote an extensive investigation for Mint Press on this.
Well, I mean, it's pretty wild. Like, all of this stuff is just, I think the most striking part of it is like these people are doing this in the name of this bizarre fight. They think they're fighting against so-called authoritarian states.
Yeah, so
that suppress speech.
Yeah, but we're there's actually a huge story here that it's amazing that they're like, it really says a lot about the British press. And this can be in the episode when we'll bring, hopefully we can bring Kit back in, but if for some reason we don't, a lot of this, if I'm following Kit correctly, these emails are all related and at least in connected batches of documents. And there's this whole operation to like remove Boris Johnson and replace him with Priti Patel. And we've got Kit back here.
I think that the rather spectacular collapse of the Disinformation Governance Board was, I mean, that was a testament to people power, and it underlined, very starkly the power of independent media. Because, the welcome that Nina Jankowicz got in the mainstream was overwhelmingly positive. She was hailed as this kind of seasoned veteran of disinformation expert who was doing God's work and blah 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 blah. And then it was independent journalists and activists and rights groups that raised the alarm and said, well, okay, she has a history of making false statements, like claiming that the Hunter Biden's laptop was a Russian information operation when it wasn't, of endorsing Chaucerian frauds like Christopher Steele, and yes, like vicious attacks on WikiLeaks, the Grayzone, all sorts of independent journalists as somehow Kremlin assets. And yes, if it wasn't for that backlash, it's worrying to think where we would be now. I mean, we were assured that the board would have no executive power. I mean, the idea there wouldn't have been mission creep, and it wouldn't have very quickly have been directly policing what appears on what appears online. I mean, already we found out in March that the White House was giving direct briefings to TikTok stars on the Pentagon's key objectives in the Ukraine conflict. And again, this is something that Open Information Partnership did. It trained cadres of supposed citizen journalists in the former Soviet sphere to make kind of slick videos that were effectively scripted by the British Foreign Office and then presented as just like independent grassroots activism.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's put up one more slide here, just so people get a really full sense of what we mean when we're talking about targeting people. So this is from the latest report, and we're recording this on June 30th. So this is from your latest thing about the right-wing targeting or wanting to target the green blob or these green lobby groups and renewable energy interests, etc. And it just, I just thought this was a good layout of what their plan is, because it talks about preparing influence diagrams of the key individuals. So these are basically like J. Edgar Hoover style dossiers that they would be making, where you get your business, educational, political, institutional, the social, including sexual. I mean, you got to have that because you got to destroy people.
It's absolutely vital.
Yeah, that's a key way. I mean, that's we always. It's impossible to not do shows like this and get away with ignoring Daniel Ellsberg. I mean, Daniel Ellsberg, the Nixon administration, because of the kind of lifestyle he led, he was a Pentagon Papers whistleblower, but they wanted to know what he was doing at parties, what kind of drugs he was doing, what kind of stuff he was into, what he was telling a psychiatrist. And that's the kind of thing this influence diagram would put in there. And it says plot these onto the bureaucratic, political, and funding networks, which they animate. And then it goes on to say to link these to influence diagrams of red and green, useful fools of Great Britain's enemies, which is absolutely essential, right? We have to figure out the people who we think are not capable of understanding issues and current events without being duped by these groups and people. And then I sort of get lost at this point, but it gets so convoluted that they're making points of optimal weakness, which can be attacked with the greatest economy of effort for maximum disruptive effect, which just I think is a very highfalutin way of saying that they're not going to back down and they're going to be very confident in going after these targets.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting, like how much overlap there is in the perspective of this kind of far right, group of former intelligence lunatics and Paul Mason. I mean, they likewise see anything and everything as a kind of potential Chinese plot. The Black Lives Matter, wokery in general is like being secretly run by Beijing to undermine Western society. But yeah, I mean, the disclosures around Patel are particularly interesting because it's clear that they have a direct line to her, and they have, she met in private with the aforementioned Gwydion Prince, and afterwards allegedly asked him to set up a proton mail for her so they could speak in private. We don't know whether that came to pass. It would be a very serious breach of the ministerial code if it did go ahead, although, I mean, she's previously been found to have broken the ministerial code a great many times and nothing's ever come of it. So, but anyway, it's just, that essentially this is a bunch of very paranoid, kind of crazed people who are willing to stop at almost literally nothing to kind of crush domestic dissent. Gwydion Prince is a long time climate change denier. The fact that they have an apparent direct line and she has kind of sympathy for their viewpoints is disturbing, because some of the emails reveal that she is secretly running a leadership contest. Now, this has never been publicized. The typical mainstream media line is that she has no leadership ambitions. She is a key kind of Johnson confidant and ally. Enjoys a high degree of protection as a result. And during the recent no confidence vote in Johnson, she was rallying Conservative MPs to back him because it would be a win for Putin if he lost. I mean, I think this is a very traditionally British method of getting behind someone so you can stab them in the back. There are other indications that the government policy on fracking was directly influenced by these people. And again, this is a snapshot of how power actually works. You're given this almost like movie-like depiction of party politics in the US and the UK, which bears zero relation to reality. And there's an enormous number of individuals and kind of secret nexuses who are actually influencing policy far more effectively and to a far greater degree than any average voter ever could.
Right. I mean, I think that's the perfect encapsulation of what and why these people are these people are disturbed, but they also have to do this. You pointed out how they said they actually stated in some of these classified documents that part of the problem with the Russian or the useful idiots or Russian disinformation is that some of it's factually true. This is the only way that they can deal with the fact that as far as narratives are concerned, their side is wrong. Their side is wrong. The imperialist side is full of lies and half truths and mostly lies. And the only way to prevent a public that is increasingly distrustful of leaders who continue to lie to them is to suppress anybody who's exposing the truth. So it's their only option is to be authoritarian in the name of protecting freedom, which is so batshit backwards.
Yeah. I mean, Mason has made this point, in public several times. It's we need to have state censorship of the media in order to defend democracy. And I think that it's a reflection of the fact that people in power actually know how fragile their position is, and how the more people are aware of the realities of their governments and the world, that the less likely they are to be able to get away with it. And it's just, again, there's another very illuminating a passage in one email where Mason talks about how he fears the emergence of an anti-imperial kind of an anti-imperialist movement, because liberalism would have no response to it. And it doesn't. It has zero response to anti-imperialism, because liberalism is based on this deeply self-deceived, self-aggrandizing notion that the Western world has a monopoly on decency and morality, and and it's actually under threat from barbarians at the gate like China and Russia. And then the anti-imperialist position is that, that our standard of living, and indeed many of the rights and freedoms we enjoy, is based on exploitation and slaughter and oppression abroad. And this reality has been consistently hidden from people for centuries, and it continues to be to this day.
Right.
Yeah. And one last question I have for you before we conclude, and you don't have to go on long, but I'm thinking of the Podesta emails and the backlash to them. And we saw that when WikiLeaks published them instantly, before there really was a narrative, that Russia was behind it, although they kind of was already implied in a lot of their response if we're looking at Clinton campaign leaders. But their instant response was to say that these were forgeries, they were maybe fake, and they tried that in the media until a lot of the contents were checking out. And you even had hosts of CNN programs that were, accepting them as true, which made it difficult for them to claim that they were forgeries. And uh, and then after that, in the aftermath of that, and then with the Russiagate hysteria, we've seen platforms adopt policies against covering hacked or even just plain old leaked materials. We've seen people who do this kind of reporting have labels affixed to their content that warns people, whether it's based in reality or not, has warnings that this is, hacked material and who knows where it came from and who was behind it. And so I wanted to give you a couple of minutes at the end here to say anything you might have to add about the response to this and the particular way in which, your reporting has been distributed or shared, and what you've been able to observe in as far as efforts to suppress it. I know that the Grayzone does a YouTube show, and I think it was labeled before, but I also saw that you shared something. Was there a contact? Was there some kind of an official contact related to the use of hacked materials that was sent over by did the government flag this reporting? I also know that Paul Mason wanted some kind of an investigation into this, right? Because he believes that he's been targeted.
Yeah, I mean, the response has been quite interesting. I mean, Mason has gone, from saying that he wouldn't comment on it to claiming that, oh well, the material has just likely been forged or edited without any indication of what has been, which you think would be at the top of your agenda if it was actually untrue. I mean, I find it interesting that, just more generally, that this is classic, that when material that's kind of damaging to like Western interest, like leaks, the narrative is almost invariably, oh well, this is a Russian hack, and then therefore you can't trust the material, or it's part of some kind of sinister, malign information operation, and therefore by reporting on it or sharing it, you are a witting pawn of the Kremlin. I mean, the source never seems to matter when it's material like damaging to the Chinese or Russian governments or the Iranian government, and we know very well, because it's been acknowledged in the media, that the CIA and NSA do target enemy governments with hacking campaigns. And so, I mean, or you look at like the Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers, we don't know who leaked this many years on, but that doesn't seem to matter. The source doesn't seem to be at all material. I mean, we've been subject to legal threats. The Grayzone, and indeed Mint Press have all received cease and desist orders. We laughed them off. I mean, it was really rather ludicrous and based on the false premise that I'd hacked this material myself. I wouldn't know how to, or even begin to know how to do something like that. And there's been an enormous number of kind of the Mason and Mason supporters and those of Emma Bryant who've attempted bully and harass and intimidate other journalists and media outlets from reporting on this. An individual named Peter Jukes is just deeply disturbed, I think, was aggressively targeting Novara media because its leading contributors shared some of this work. They were, to their credit, undeterred by this, and went ahead and covered it in some detail. And so, I mean, their attempts to frame the narrative that, that this is just a hack and the material is false, doesn't seem to have worked. Although, I mean, I would imagine that the next time that there's a major leak like this, they'll just use the exact same game plan and blueprint for trying to respond to it.
There's a lot of disturbed individuals in this story. Yes. So, okay. Well, thank you for joining us, Kit.
My pleasure.
And I think maybe Rania had something happen with her internet. So
it happens.
We've had a lot of something happening with our internet on this show. I'm just going to take her down and conclude, although it would have been nice to have her. But thank you, Kit, for joining us. You're doing fantastic work, and we'll keep following your reporting on the UK intelligence state and the way it's targeting journalists, academics, And it even seems like normal, average, run-of-the-mill civil society people who really aren't trying to do much of anything but maybe influence political policy in the most minor and lukewarm fashion. But if they're on the
Indeed.
wrong side, then they are to be eliminated by this cabal of people that you've singled out. So thank you very much. And thank you all for watching and tuning into the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. We'll be back next week with another episode.